This is 1 in 44, a presentation of Anderson Center for Autism. 1 in 44 is a weekly show devoted to autism spectrum disorder.
Good morning and welcome to 1 in 44, the weekly talk show on topics related to autism spectrum disorder. I'm your host, Eliza Bozensky, Chief Development Officer at Anderson Center for Autism. And this morning, I am speaking with Paul Cimins, who is President, Founder, CEO, and all-around leader of Autism Radio. Paul, good morning.
Hey, good morning. Thanks for having me on.
It's my pleasure. And we don't always get a chance to interview somebody who also interviews and is on the radio airwaves as well. So it's exciting. And I just want to kind of give the floor to you to introduce us to yourself, give us some background about who you are and tell us about Autism Radio.
So obviously, Paul Cimins, grew up in New Jersey, northern New Jersey, was a trained chef for many, many years, worked in the food industry. And I had my own business for close to 20 years doing corporate dining. Also was one of the first online catering companies called cateringexpert.com in the very early 90s when the internet was just kind of growing. And now I'm a director of dining services for senior living. So I kind of transitioned into that. Yeah. So I have a full-time job and Hope Saves a Day, which is the podcast / radio show, was kind of like a brainchild idea. I was actually recovering from surgery on my shoulder, and I was sitting on the couch, and my wife and I used to go to support groups back in the day called COSAC, which was a very grassroots organization, which is now Autism New Jersey. And just finding the time, I think going to a support group, finding a babysitter for our son, which was diagnosed with autism at the age of 2.5 years old. His name is Jonathan Lewis Cimins, which is named after both my grandparents. We didn't really know a lot about the world of autism. So we were learning a lot. When he recently got his diagnosis at the age of 2.5 years old, the only thing I knew of was really Rain Man. I mean, that was the only correlation I had about the world of autism. I knew really very little about it. And there was not a lot of information out there at the time. It was very far and few that you could get some information. In fact, in my town, they didn't even have an autism program for special needs at that time. So you got to remember, this is like 2005.
I was going to say, so around the early 2000s. Yeah. I think, your story is something that I think would resonate with a large number of other parents who, you think of the 2000s, there should have been access to so many services. And you think of New Jersey and you think that would be a state where you'd think there'd be so much opportunity. But it really wasn't that long ago. And still now there's a need for more information, awareness. I know I've gone on your website. I know that's a huge part of what you're doing now is trying to broaden that awareness and accessibility to resources for families and individuals on the spectrum. But it was, even in 2005, you're in a town in northern New Jersey, which is pretty connected to some major metropolises, and you couldn't find services in your town.
Exactly. And it was interesting at that time, again, just connecting with other parents. It was hard to find a lot of parents that had autistic children, and just to have conversations with. There was very few that I knew of. And again, came up with this idea of starting a podcast, which podcast was very new to the industry at the time. Kind of took a leap of faith and said, hey, I'm going to put this out there. I didn't tell anyone about it. Just went ahead and said, I'm going to try this. And I had no idea how it was going to turn out, if I was going to have one listener. I had no idea.
Right.
And I was my brother actually had a website, and I was actually putting my podcast on his website in the beginning. And I think the first week maybe had 10 listeners, and it's interesting how it just grew. And then once I got my own website, it really just took off, to the point where we had hundreds and hundreds of thousands of listeners to our podcast. And then in 2009, Clear Channel Media, which is now iHeartRadio, they signed us to a syndication. And we started out with like 14 FM radio stations, which today I'm proud to say we're on over 58 FM stations throughout the country, UK, and also Canada as well. So,
congratulations. That's huge growth. That's huge growth.
Yep.
So you went from 10 listeners on your brother's website with an idea that you purposely didn't tell anyone. So you promoted.
No, I did not.
Not your plan at the time.
No.
You just wanted to see what happened naturally. So what is it that you think, I'm sure at this point you've gotten some, analytics, but you've also probably spoken to a lot of your listeners. What is it that draws them in? Why is your podcast unique?
Well, I think, in the beginning, it was very much telling my story, my struggles, my challenges as a parent and sharing that, like being real.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of parents resonated with that. I think that was really the key that connected my audience with, me with the audience, basically. And I remember having a Gmail account, hopesavestheday@gmail.com, which doesn't even exist anymore. And, getting an email from a lady in Texas who was a single mom and said, "Hey, I'm up 2 a.m. in the morning listening to your podcast." And she said, I'm really struggling. And, just listening to your story, I felt like I wasn't so alone and so isolated. So that was big. That was kind of like that aha moment where it was like, maybe I'm onto something here. And again, like I said, I had no idea how this was going to turn out. I mean, I think it was more for me at the time, like therapeutic for me just to talk, like almost like I was talking to somebody, even though I was talking to myself a lot. And it was interesting. And then, of course, the show, when we hit 2009, that's when the show started flourishing and we started bringing on guests and expert in the autism field. I mean, we've had every mainstream expert from you name it through kind of like different generations. Like when we look at like the starting point, when you had organizations that were just starting out, which are big, like Generation Rescue, which was one of the ones, they were just starting out. We had Jenny McCarthy on. We had all these, individuals that were starting, growing their organization in the autism field. And we were kind of there like grassroots, just, getting information out at the time. And it was kind of interesting when I look back at, Dr. Temple Grandin, that was before, she won the Time, magazine award, top 100 most influential people in the world. And, we interviewed her very early on. And, it was even before the movie she did on HBO, Claire Danes, we interviewed her on the program. So we've had a lot of, big names on our show and our program to really share the story. I think it's also about giving people hope. I mean, the show's called Hope Saves the Day. So it's also inspiring and really connecting the dots for a lot of people and getting out information and being able to share other resources, like what you're doing, be able to, get out information to individuals that might need some help or trying to navigate their way too. Because even now there's like an overload of information. So I try to simplify that too. Yeah,
it's interesting. Things have shifted a little bit where you still need the support and guidance, figuring out what is pertinent and relevant to you and your situation. But I think that there's a thread, there's a common theme. And you talked about it earlier that really has to do with sincerity and being real. And I come at this with this show, with 1 in 44, from the perspective of working at Anderson Center for Autism and having connections to many, many families who place their children here and their stories, but also similar to you and just really wanting to help listeners, whoever you might be, take something away, whether it's a resource or a book to read or an inspiration that maybe there's something they can do as a parent when they're feeling sort of lost and helpless. But everything that I do and all the conversations I have are really, they're real and they're sincere. And I'm learning as we're talking kind of, from every guest. You came at it initially from the perspective as a parent, but also you said the same thing, that really you think what resonated initially with listeners was you were sitting there telling your story and following the experience of being Jonathan's dad. And I think certainly there could be more of that in the world. But I think those are the things to me that are pushing the needle, that are moving the needle in terms of lessening stigma and encouraging more parents to look, to ask a question at the pediatrician's office if they think something might be a little bit off, a little bit different, if they have a question, instead of sort of saying, I don't want to talk to anybody about this. I think the more that people from various perspectives in the field or the living with autism in any capacity talk, the more others will feel like it's safe to do so. So I appreciate that just from that standpoint of what you're doing. And yeah, the impact of Autism Radio and the breadth and the types of guests, it's really, really impressive. So congratulations again.
Thank you. And that's one small part of what we do too.
Yes. Start telling us the rest.
Yeah. So, 2010, I said, we needed to do more. Like the radio show was great. The podcast was great, but I wanted to be able to help impact families directly. So we became a nonprofit 501c3 organization in 2010. And I wanted to have free programs that were available, resources available for parents that couldn't afford them, services that maybe they want to try that they don't have the means to do so. So, we had several programs that we run. We still run several of them throughout the year, even through the pandemic, because we tried different things like therapy, horseback riding, martial arts programs, musical therapy. And again, we have all these programs throughout New Jersey, but we also have 5 other states that we have them available as well. So we expanded our horizon basically and our wings and said, hey, we want to do more for the families, again, to get them some help and support. I always like this story the best, and this resonates with me, was the first family you helped. It was a single mom. Again, she was from Texas. She reached out to us, had a child that was non-speaking. We provided her with an iPad with the ProLoco software at the time, which was state of the art. Yes. We provided her with a speech pathologist to come in the house and work with her child day after day, at least 3 days a week, which obviously, is a cost. So we picked up that bill completely, provided that service to her and her child. And, 9 months later, I'll never forget that she calls me up on the phone crying hysterically. And I wasn't sure what was wrong. I was like, oh my God, you okay? Like, she's like, she was actually so overwhelmed that her son used the iPad for the first time and said, Mommy, I love you. Oh. And that's a huge, that just touched my heart. Yeah. I don't know what else to say, but that really resonated with me like huge. I was like, oh my God, wow. Actually to be able to impact a life, like I considered ourselves like we're just a piece of the puzzle. It's interesting how autism is the puzzle, represents it. But, it's kind of like there's multiple pieces that need to put it together. And there's always like, when we look at autism, it takes a village, right, to really raise a child with autism. So absolutely.
I'm going to stop you there just because it's a beautiful sentiment and a beautiful story. We're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, let's dive into more of how that happens and how people who are listening to you and listening to this podcast today might learn more about those resources and how that's grown. But a great place to take a break. Let's let that sink in. The Mommy, I love you. It's great. This is 1 in 44, the weekly talk show on topics related to autism spectrum disorder. I'm your host, Eliza Bozensky, and we'll be right back.
Hey, Joe, I thought you were retired.
Living on a fixed income is tough. So here I am, an essential worker.
I know. Food prices are going up every day. Thank goodness for benefitscheckup.org.
Benefits what?
benefitscheckup.org. It's a free website where people over 60 can find help to pay for food, medicine, even utilities. I got $1,200 a year in benefits. Maybe it can help you.
And now, 1 in 44 continues on 100.7 WHUD. This is a weekly community affairs program presented by the Anderson Center for Autism.
Welcome back to 1 in 44, the weekly talk show on topics related to autism spectrum disorder. I'm your host, Eliza Bozensky, and today I'm speaking with Paul Cimins, who is president, founder, CEO of Autism Radio. You can find out more by visiting autismradio.org. Paul, in the first half of the show, you went over some of your background, how you started the podcast and now really broadly reaching radio show and some of the guests that you've had on. But you left us with this beautiful story of really the first, I guess, direct feedback that you got from a listener and somebody who benefited from the accessibilities and some resources that you found a way to help some families access. That story, I've heard it in various ways before, of a child maybe for the first time finding a way to communicate the words "I love you" to a parent. And every time I hear it, no matter, how it happened with a particular family, what age, how long they went without knowing whether the child was affectionate in other ways or completely not affectionate in physically. And it always really just brings home for me just the things that you don't know. So much that you don't know when you're interacting with people in your community, at the store, on the sidewalk, at the school, waiting maybe to pick up another child, or really just anywhere. There still is stigma. There still are people who stare and don't want to look or be around a family who might be struggling with a child who's engaging maybe in some challenging behaviors. But I just want to connect the two in terms of, that was such a beautiful story. It's a good reminder that none of us should take for granted that we have the ability, those of us who are speaking, to express that to other people, and that we also often are surrounded by children and other loved ones, maybe grandchildren, who run up and give a hug and say, "I love you" all the time. It's special, and you don't really realize, I'm sure, just how special it is until you don't have it for a very long time,
right?
Or perhaps forever in that way. So that, you said when you finished telling that story that it was so cool to learn that you had impacted one person. I would say that you impacted at least two, the mother and her son, and probably, given the impact that had on that mom who took the initiative to then call you up and tell you all about it, that it probably impacted a lot of other people around her, because maybe it changed her in a lasting way. So I know that's a little long-winded, but I always like to just highlight things that really touch me when I hear them. So that was really cool.
Well, thank you. Yeah,
on that note, how does that all work?
Well, so I mean, that was the motivator that really said, "Hey, we got to do more, right? We got to really grow this organization, and we're 100% volunteer organization. I think that's another thing that stands out too. Again, we volunteer our time. I do the radio show. I volunteer my time. Everything that we do, we volunteer our time, so that all the funds that we raise, we're able to get back to the families and invest in our programs, which is huge because, again, obviously if you have to overhead, it is, it's expensive. And so we try to mitigate that. We have some great people, have about 400 plus volunteers that volunteer their time for the organization. And, we've grown that base over the past, almost 15 years. We've been doing this now. Again, when we look at opportunities to whether start a basketball program or martial arts or whatever, of course, we're very particular on how it's set up. We have criteria. Obviously, if there's someone out there that wants to start a program, we kind of have to vet them. We have rules, we have regulations and things that we have put in place, because I've been fortunate enough to work with some great occupational therapists and, some specialists that have kind of vetted the program and set up the guidelines for us. So again, very fortunate to be able to do that. And I think, we've had a lot of really successful stories, and that one that I shared earlier was just the first one that was the catalyst that just was like, it was almost like a drug, so you get that result, you want more, right? Yeah. So it was for me, I think one of the greatest things as an individual, as a person, right? When you really do good deeds for others, it does something to your heart. It does something to you. It makes you better. And I think it also brings a level of happiness too, that you're unaware of, that brings a wholly different perspective to others, Yeah.
I agree. At Anderson, our mission is to optimize the quality of life for people with autism. And I always say, it's such a beautiful mission to live and do every day, because inevitably, as anybody who's working here is doing their job that feeds to that mission in some capacity, our own quality of life is affected as we're doing that. So it's this really cool sort of cycle of, like you said, it inevitably makes you feel good, which it becomes addictive. That feeling of it making an impact and doing something that you just know on all levels is the right thing to do. I think it's definitely a good thing to be addicted to. So just for clarification, you said, so people or organizations who want to set up a program to provide services or supports or devices, equipment, whatever, to people to families in need. they come to you, or they come to Autism Radio or Hope Saves the Day?
Yeah, so they go to
fundraising component. How does just
so depending on what they're doing, if they're looking for services, obviously they can go to autismradio.org and apply for services. It's pretty simple. It's a one page. They can apply. Of course, we have a sponsors page too. People that want to donate or sponsor, whether it's a specific therapy or individual, or if they want to, support one of our programs, like our Swim for Hope program has grown tremendously. We had 150 some odd swimmers last year in our program. We do everything from learn to swim, and then that team, it becomes Team Hope, which is our signature team that swims at the Special Olympics. So,
great.
So we had a team that's competing now for 11 years. 11 years now. Wow. We have Team Hope competing at Special Olympics.
That's year. Fantastic.
Pretty awesome. Yeah.
So people who you can donate money, I would assume.
Yeah, absolutely.
You can also donate if you're maybe a manufacturer of certain types of equipment or devices, or if you are a service provider, you can donate your time. Let's say you're a licensed OT or something. You can donate OT services maybe in a geographic area. And so then you help make the connection with the parent applying for services and the service providers.
That's right. That's correct.
What a great role to play. That's awesome.
Yeah. We're kind of like that middleman, I guess, in the industry where, we're connecting a lot of dots, because we are connected at the grassroots with the families, kind of in the trenches. One of my favorite programs is Hope from the Holidays. We get to do that where we go out with Santa and we get to visit individuals in their home that may not have the financial needs to provide, a lot of Christmas celebration for their families. So, but we want to make sure we take care of the whole family, not just the child with autism or the individual with autism. We want to make sure the other siblings are part of that too, as well as mom and dad get plenty of food for their, Christmas or holiday feast, whatever it might be. But we've been doing that for several years. That brings me a tremendous amount of joy doing that. So.
Well, that's fantastic. And I think, that story also, Hope from the Holidays, that reinforces another point that it sounds like you're addressing in a number of ways, which is the isolation that so many families can feel. Sometimes it's isolation based on lack of resources, lack of, funds to be able to go somewhere or buy groceries for a really special meal, or maybe their child, their loved one with autism is just not going to tolerate sitting around a holiday dinner or waiting for all the time it takes to go. It's so many different factors, right? But also sometimes it's just you want the holidays to come to you, because leaving the house in and of itself carries so much of an unknown factor of whether you're actually going to make it to the event that you might be going to. So,
absolutely.
So fantastic. We are just about out of time. We're down to our last 2 minutes. And so, Paul, I just wonder if you could share with us any things coming down the pike in the future that you want people to be aware of, or just any parting thoughts.
So obviously September's rolling around. Anybody interested in our swimming program, it's getting to start up again. Individuals looking for learn to swim or want to join our swim teams in our various different areas. We have 3 different swim teams here in the state of New Jersey. So you can go to autismradio.org if you're interested, and just email us or apply for services. It's really easy. They can email us at info@autismradio.org, or if they'd like, they can reach directly to me, which is paul@autismradio.org as well. And again, they can apply for services. So pretty easy ways. We also have our toll-free number on our podcast, which is 1-877-HOPE. 777, and they can call that line 24/7. It's amazing because that line is open. It's basically like a voicemail, but we get an email immediately on that. So usually within less than 24 hours, you're getting a return call if you need something. So
I think that's great. I'm going to repeat all that. I wrote it down only because I think that sometimes even thinking about finding enough time to write an email or do an application, which can sound daunting, even though if you go to the website, it really isn't. It's very easy. But if you have 30 seconds to make a phone call and just say, this is who I am, this is how to reach me, I need some help, and you're going to get a response back. Right. That's a great way to reach people. So it's info@autismradio.org, or to reach Paul directly, it's paul@autismradio.org, or the toll-free number is 877-HOPE, HOPE 777.
That's correct.
And all you have to do is leave a voicemail, and the folks at Autism Radio will get an email alerting them to the fact that you called. And again, apply for services. If you have a few more minutes, take the time to just directly apply for services on the website, which is autismradio.org.
Absolutely.
And swim team sounds great. So if you're in
it's a lot of fun.
Area, I hear this all the time. I know at Anderson, certainly we have an outdoor pool, so it's only available in the summer months, but we have quite a number of kids here who absolutely love the pool and would spend, hours in it. So, so if you have a child who's all about swimming, please consider getting involved. And Paul Cimins from Autism Radio, I appreciate you getting on the show.
Thank you.
And telling us about what you do. And I also just really appreciate what you are all doing and your team of 400 plus volunteers. That's really incredible and inspiring. So thank you.
Thank you, Elisa. I appreciate being on your show today.
All right. You have a great day. Again, this is 1 in 44, the weekly talk show on topics related to autism spectrum disorder. I'm your host, Eliza Bozensky. And remember, Anderson cares.
You've been listening to 1 in 44, a weekly presentation of the Anderson Center for Autism. Join us for another edition of the show at this time next weekend.